Yeah, I'm familiar with the report. I read it. If anything, they're being generous in that report to all of us. Israel's position is extremely delicate right now. They have virtually no air and missile defense whatsoever. 8 out of every 10 missiles and virtually most so-called drones are penetrating without opposition. So Israel is really in very bad shape. Now, as far as we're concerned, we need to keep in mind that all of the very expensive radars that we had installed across the region have been destroyed, which means we have great difficulty picking up on a lot of these missiles that are shot at us until, frankly, they're almost on top of us. And then finally, remember that we're 7,000 miles away from the United States. So when you're replenishing your stocks, which is what is happening right now, the replenishment has to come from the United States, thousands of miles. Then it has to be loaded. It has to be loaded onto aircraft, loaded onto ships, all of the time. And that's what this pause is all about. And I think then there will be an attempt to launch what they hope will be a war-winning offensive. And I don't think it's going to turn out that way at all. I think this is something for which the Iranians have prepared for over 20 years.
And the Americans did not?
No, of course not. You know, our manufacturing base has shrunken dramatically. We don't have the capacity that we did 40 or 50 years ago to surge production. We're not in the same position as Russia and China right now militarily at all. I think we just grossly miscalculated. We assumed things that were untrue. We assumed that we could bully Iran. We assumed that Iran could be isolated. And I think we completely missed the boat on the economic catastrophe that we're creating globally. You're feeling the impact of this in India. You know that your citizens are lining up in order to fill their gas tanks, and that's no pleasure. You have a similar situation in Japan. This is happening in Europe. Now, the Russians, of course, are making more than $250 million a day more than they previously did. But the Russians and the Chinese both want an end to this because they see supply chains being destroyed. And if we press ahead with this next war-winning offensive, I think that will finish off all the oil infrastructure in the Persian Gulf. Because the Iranians have said very clearly, if you attack our infrastructure, our oil infrastructure, our desalination plants, we will wipe out everything in the Gulf. This has got to stop. And President Trump has to recognize that whatever advice he got was bad. He ought to fire everybody working for him right now in the White House.
Maybe there's some realizing that's why this attempt to shift the onus on Israel or on Pete Hegseth. But Colonel, one interesting observation you made in your last answer, which was that the Iranian warfare this time has pivoted a lot on space-based intelligence. Now, so far as I know, they do not have satellites. Who's providing them this space-based intelligence?
The Chinese and the Russians. And as a result, anything that moves within 1,000 miles of Iran is immediately identified and picked up. And that information is linked near simultaneously to all of the strike systems on the ground inside Iran. Russia and China have no interest in seeing Iran destroyed by us. They don't have any interest in seeing the society disintegrate. No one in the region wants Iran to become a basket case that the Israelis and Americans can run in, take over the oil fields in their wildest imagination, and essentially divide Iran into smaller bits and pieces, driving millions of people as refugees into Syria, Turkey, Arabia, and ultimately Europe. None of this is desirable. So again, everybody miscalculated because I think Trump listened far, far too much to the Israelis. And the Israelis promised a short, decisive war.
Yeah.
Now they're paying the ultimate price.
You mentioned Israelis. Look at the situation in Israel, Abhishek. And Colonel, I'm sure you've gone through these reports of the Israeli Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir. He's warned that the IDF could collapse in on itself due to the shortage of soldiers. They're
fatigue that's building.
Fatigue. And the multi-war...
Maybe not as many casualties, but the sheer fatigue of having been in a war. Remember, not for the last 1 month, for the last 2 years, 3 years.
Well, of course, keep something in mind. We don't true numbers of casualties for ourselves as well as for the Israelis. No one in Washington or Tel Aviv or Jerusalem is interested in telling anybody the truth right now. And this is not new. We've always slow-rolled casualties in all our wars. But right now, I suspect that we have all sustained far more casualties than we're admitting. As far as the Israelis are concerned, they've depended very heavily on air power for their military strength. They've always had a small army, a small regular force augmented by hundreds of thousands of reservists. This can't work over time. They're running out of steam, not just people, but they're exhausted. They have had lots of losses. But I think the Israelis bet heavily that we would be their infantry as well as their artillery and their air power. That hasn't worked out well.
Yeah. And domestically, both Trump and Netanyahu are now facing this unique situation where there is massive opposition. Republicans themselves questioning Donald Trump. Saw a few of those comments come in. People are unhappy. In Israel, the opposition is questioning Netanyahu. By the way, where is Netanyahu? Nobody knows. I saw a report today, Abhishek, Colonel, that mentioned that maybe his flight was spotted in Berlin. He's been in Berlin for last 2 weeks. I don't know where he is, but it appears extremely shady at the moment.
Yeah, you're right. I have no idea where he is. I would be careful, though, of the American situation. Go back to President Trump's State of the Union address, and when he talked about stopping Iran from having a nuclear weapon and taking whatever action was required, he got a standing ovation from virtually everybody in Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, because they've all effectively been bought by the Israel lobby. And the billionaires that back the Israel lobby have bought up these candidates. And as a result, I have almost no sympathy whatsoever for Congress. They're as culpable in all of this nonsense as is the president. But the president, if he wants to get out of this mess, should not continue to do what doesn't work. Remember the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over again in the expectation that you're going to get a different result. This next war-winning assault is not going to win the war. What he ought to do at this point is fire the people around him, step forward and say, look, I was wrong. This was a mistake. I'm disengaging. If he were willing to do that, then large numbers of people in the world, I think, leaders would come and assist him to mediate an end to this tragedy. That's one of the reasons that I mentioned Prime Minister Modi previously. But there are others that could come in as well, people that all sides could trust. That's what we desperately need. We don't need an extension of this war.
Yes. Couple of last questions. Last two, and I'll take one, Abhishek, and you can take one on Kargil Island. I wanted to ask Colonel McGregor on, and you can take that, and I'll take the one on Pakistan, because you've spoken about Pakistan. You know, this joke of a country called Pakistan wants to mediate on the war. What's happening on that front? What are you hearing? Are they really mediating? Is there a mediation at all?
You know, I have my doubts. I don't know. I mean, at this point, I don't think President Trump would turn away anybody who offered help. But whether or not that means anything, I mean, he says we're holding talks. What I've seen in the past is that the CIA and Mossad will pick people out of a government, people at levels below the senior leadership, and start conversing with them in the hopes that they can be co-opted or bribed. And ultimately, that'll help us win whatever we want to win. That's not going to work with Iran. The Mossad was already in and bought people up.
They're acting as a courier.
When he says he's talking to someone in Iran, who is he talking to?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point. None of us really knows. And that's why I think the intelligence agencies are talking to generals, colonels, or somebody somewhere in the hopes that this is going to be a breakthrough. I think it's just nonsense. I think you can't believe much of what's coming out of Washington right now. Everyone is desperate, even though we project this air of confidence. The truth is, behind the scenes, the president is quite desperate. He recognizes at this stage that he was lied to, and he made some bad calls. Well, the only way to get out of it is to admit that and disengage and ask for help from others. That's the only way. But at the moment, the plan is to do what I said before, be insane, double down on what has failed in the past and hope that it works. It's not going to happen. I don't care how many little islands they try to seize in the Persian Gulf. You put people on an island that's perhaps 14 or 15 square kilometers and a few intermediate range ballistic missiles or tactical ballistic missiles and drones, and everybody on the island is dead. This is not 1944. This is not 1984. This is 2026. Warfare is different. It's changed.
Well, it is 1984 in the sense that war is peace. But Colonel McGregor, my question is, if the weaponry is depleted, as you suggest, if the leadership is so clueless as to where to take this next, How then are you saying that the United States is going to double down? There are no weapons, there is no direction. How do you double down? You can't.
Well, that's why you have a break right now. This is why you've got this phony pause. It's not for peace talks, it's to replenish the stocks. So I think they're bringing in whatever we still have in the United States, sitting on the shelves, and bringing it out to the theater. That's what's happening to the Navy and the Air Force. And at the same time, whenever air campaigns fail historically, we then turn to the use of ground forces. That's what happened to us in Vietnam with Rolling Thunder. I went through this during the Kosovo air campaign. It lasted 78 days. And by 60 days into the campaign, it was obvious it wasn't working. And there were tremendous efforts to try and press President Clinton to commit ground forces. Ultimately, he refused to, and instead we managed to bribe the Russians to pull the plug on Milosevic in Serbia and end the campaign. This is a dumb idea. Anytime you go into any fight and you take the approach that you're going to use air power only because you don't want casualties, you're setting yourself up for failure.
You know, Colonel Mac, you just gave, half a dozen of the list of 83 attempts or successes that the United States has had on regime change, this time perhaps failing,
I doubt it. I doubt it. I think that's a bridge too far for them. And if you land down near the border with Pakistan, Baluchistan, and you try to march north, that would be the death march of death marches for an army trying to cross these vast territories. And here's something else that people just don't understand. We live in a new world. Everybody says, well, this is asymmetric warfare. No, it's not. You have on one side the United States, which has fielded its World War II force structure. You're looking at the 1944-45 force structure with new stuff, but it's the same force structure. Aircraft carrier battle groups, lots of aircraft, bombers, and so forth. On the other side is the new 21st century force structure, and that is the ISR strike structure. Well, what does that look like? Well, this was first created as an idea by the Russians in the 1970s. And what they figured out was you have sensors in space, you have sensors at sea, you have sensors on the ground, sensors midway between space, terrestrial. You link all of these sensors in real time to all of these strike systems, which are becoming very precise. And now we've reached the point where this precision is striking. It's incredible. And we once had a monopoly on precision back before the turn of the century. We've lost that. That precision capability rests in the hands of people all over the world. And suddenly, mid-range powers that before were largely incapable of presenting resistance can shut down our armed forces. And what you have now is the ability from space to see everything all the time. We call it persistent surveillance. You have Chinese satellites, Russian satellites feeding this imagery and information to the Iranians. The Iranians take this instantaneously, match it to their tactical ballistic missiles, their cruise missiles, their unmanned systems, and they can launch out to 1,000 miles. They can destroy ports on the Red Sea. They can essentially shut down traffic, commercial traffic, but more important, military traffic.
Yeah.
So if you tried to land on the southern part of Iran, they would see it immediately. The only question that they would then ask themselves is, how long do we wait before we destroy it? Watch the buildup, let them come ashore, and then annihilate them with all of the weapon systems I just described. Now move over to the Persian Gulf. How do you get the Marines and the soldiers there? Are you going to fly them on V-22s and helicopters? Are you going to drop them from the air with parachutes? And once they land, what do? You know, we have a saying in the military, in the Army at any rate, what you do after you arrive is much more important than how fast you get there. Now, we can move all this light infantry there very quickly. And you know what? Under the wrong circumstances, they can also die very quickly because you have no means to protect them. I don't know what the thinking is. Perhaps there is some sort of miracle of engineering that breaks the laws of physics that will allow us to magically insert people without anybody being seen. I have no idea, but I haven't seen it. So my assumption is the laws of physics still apply. And as a result, we're going to put a lot of people in a very dangerous place, and we're not going to get the effect from it that we want. I mean, I'm sure you've heard people say, In fact, Senator Graham said this. Well, if we take Carg Island, war over. That's it.
It's
Are you
alarming what he says.
crazy? I mean, you mean there's no other way for the Iranians to export oil? And by the way, the Iranians have made it very clear, if you do this to us and you destroy our oil infrastructure, or try to, and our natural gas, then you're all going to lose everything in the Gulf. All these GCC countries that have been loyal vassals, first of the British Empire that created them, and then secondly became our vassal states, in return for which we said we'd protect all these family dictatorships, they're going to be out of business, not just today, but permanently.
Right.
So I just don't see an easy way out, but I think we're going to try something. And I think it's going to fail. Keep in mind that President Trump, whether he cares to admit it publicly, faces humiliation nationally and internationally. Now, why is that the case? Because he's grossly miscalculated, grossly underestimated the challenge that he took on when he decided to attack Iran. I think he listened to a lot of vacuous promises from the Israeli side. The Israelis tend to feel contempt for the various Muslims and countries that surround them, which is a very bad thing. I think he bought the argument that this would be quick and dirty and that he could somehow or another profit from it. He now knows that's not possible. So, this is back to what does he do next? And I think his instincts are saying, I've got to double down and smash Iran. I've got to rub their noses in the dirt. So I never took seriously this 5-day pause. If anything, the pause that he's taking, and by the way, as you point out, that doesn't apply to the Israelis. The Israelis are bombing oil infrastructure, plants, anything they can. And that doesn't help matters, but they're not terribly responsive at this stage to President Trump. I think they regard him as a bought man who's going to have to do whatever they tell him. I think that's a mistake because I do know President Trump, and if you push him too hard in one direction, he's going to push back. I think, though, at the moment, he's looking at this as a 5-day pause, and I suppose that his inner circle, including the military, they're all sitting in rooms saying, how do we get out of this? How does this end? What's the end state look like? What can we accept? And an awful lot in Washington is mortgaged to vanity. In other words, we can't do X because that will make us look as though we lost. And as I point out to people, what happened in Vietnam? And people say, what do you mean? I said, we lost. And what did we do? And everybody says, well, I don't remember. We
Mortgage
left.
on the collateral of thousands of American lives?
Yeah, we left. We just left. We lost and we left. And we said, too bad about the 58,500 American lives. And oh, by the way, too bad about the nearly 2 million Vietnamese we killed, needlessly and pointlessly. We just left. And many, many years later, you had people that went back to Vietnam from the United States, some of whom had served in Vietnam, like former Senator Webb. And they went there and said, look, this was a terrible mistake, and we regret it deeply, and we want to do business with you. And much to everybody's surprise, the Vietnamese were willing to cooperate, and we've had better relations since then than ever in our history. But this is a bad habit with America. I mean, I dislike it, but this is the way we do business. And I think that at some point this could happen again. But right now, I think you're going to see this war take on new dimensions. Now, when we talk about invading Iran, I love to go back to the Dardanelles in 1915 when the British decided, well, it was really Churchill, who was always severely inebriated when he made most of his decisions, and he was equivalent to the Secretary of the Navy or Minister for the Navy. And he said, well, we need to seize the Dardanelles, and once we've seized these from the Turks, then the Royal Navy can sail through the Dardanelles, through the Straits, and it can take Constantinople under fire. And we'll land more troops in Constantinople and drive the Turks out of the war. And they decided, well, after they lost some ships that they couldn't defend in the Straits, they said, well, we're going to land a force there to take the Straits. Well, if you look at the Straits in the Dardanelles, and then you look at the Straits of Hormuz, the Straits in the Dardanelles, the British landed here and the Turks were up here.
Right.
And that's the way it stayed for 9 months. And they went from 75,000 troops up to 500,000 troops. It was a catastrophe. Finally, this man Kitchener, and I'm sure you'll remember who Herbert Kitchener was, one of Britain's famous imperialist generals.
Sure.
Kitchener said, "This is crazy. We can't win this," and withdrew everybody. The British lost about 50,000 killed, and they pulled all 500,000 men out, and it failed. Now, if you go to the Straits of Hormuz, you look at the walls around the strait. Instead of being like this, they're almost like this. How are you going to take this and control it? Where do you put soldiers or Marines to control anything? Well, there are these discussions about going into the Persian Gulf and seizing islands, whether it's Karg at the top or any of the others.
May I say
How do you
something?
do this?